Hello everyone, Rich Nance here with your Defensive Tactics Technique of the Week. Today we're going to talk about Boyd's Cycle, otherwise known as the OODA loop.
So Rich, I don't know if you knew, Boyd is Colonel John Boyd, who's actually a fighter pilot, who was the first person to articulate and document the human decision-making cycle, which we also refer to as OODA loops. It's an ongoing repetitive cycle. So if you think of the OODA loop as a big circle, you start at the top with an O, you go around clockwise to your next O, and you have the D and the A. Now, do you know what these stand for?
Yes.
What are they?
Observe,
Observe,
orient,
orient,
decide,
decide,
and act.
and act. Now, we all do this every day. When you're driving your car, you're observing the conditions around you. You're observing whether it's hot or cold, if there's other traffic, and so on and so forth. You come up to a stop sign, you observe that you're approaching the stop sign. You've oriented yourself to how you relate to that stop sign as you're approaching it, and you put on the brake to slow down. You have to decide whether you're actually going to stop
If
or
there's a cop
just
around.
slow down, right, if there's a cop around. And then you have to act on your decision. Now, in applying this to law enforcement in conflict situations, we always want to make the action an appropriate, rational action before the person that we're in the conflict with. It only makes sense. If you win the OODA loop race, you win the fight.
Sure.
So here's our challenge with the OODA loop. We train for the action. We train pulling a trigger. We train striking with a baton. We train moving a knife out of the way to counterattack. But what we're constantly eating liability suits on and disciplinary actions on is what we decided to do. This decision-making process, the observe, orient, and decide, is where we need to re-examine what we knew. We need to do after action reviews of our OODA loops. We need to AAR the OODA, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
If we can get into a conflict, or if we're in a conflict with someone, and we can stop them before they get to the act, or if we can make it so that their decision-making process goes faster than they're capable of, and therefore their action's not appropriate to the circumstances, then we can win the conflict.
We've got into their loop at that point.
Right, we've got inside their loop. We're making the faster decisions. We're making more appropriate actions. Now, what are some ways we can reset an OODA loop? And I know you know one because I've experienced it as we've made other videotapes today, other training tips. This first observation is all about everything my senses bring me. What's one of the things that you can affect on my perception immediately?
Obviously, if I move, then you're going to have to orient to that.
Correct. Simple movement. I have to re-observe to reorient. Let's say I'm in the middle of, I've observed something, I've oriented myself to what you're doing, and I'm in the middle of the decision-making process, and my decision's going to be, I'm going to resist. You and I are going to have a fight because I think I can win. How can you do something to change my decision, to redirect me and force me back to the observation?
You know, something as simple, Frank, as me simply putting my hand in your face could cause you to have to now go through that entire cycle.
Absolutely. We can involuntarily, for the suspect or the subject, reset their OODA loop back to where they've got to start. And if we can continue to do that, they never get to an action. And if they can never act, then they're not a threat. So there's a number of ways that we can get inside their loop and affect them. When it comes to hard contact, one of the most basic ways is a strike. You've got the guy already down, you've proned him out, you're going to handcuff him, he starts to resist, you give him a nice good punch in the shoulder blade. Reset of his OODA loop, you get that half a second to finish cinching him up.
And that's a good point as a distraction strike in that case, right? I mean, you're striking.
Exactly.
It really is a distraction because you're striking to make him have to reorient. But let's be honest, let's not call this a distraction strike.
No,
in that case, you could
absolutely
call
not.
shooting someone a distraction.
That's what we're talking
Yeah.
about, and you're absolutely right. But now, I want to call your attention to the fact that we have this blank up here.
What's up with that? I've known about Boyd's cycle for a long time. I've never seen a blank right there.
There's a third O. It's hidden, it's secret. And Boyd knew about it. I know for certain, because he's a military officer, he knew about it. That third O, that's the one, you've heard that guy Murphy, Murphy's Law?
Yeah.
Actually, that was another protocol, if you will, that was created by Captain Murphy, who knew all too well how bad things could go unexpectedly. And what comes out of your mouth when something goes bad really fast? Oh, Yeah, that's that third O. Unfortunately, that third O applies to us more than it applies to the bad guys. That third O is what happens when we're ambushed. It's what happens when we're having a field interview with somebody and they lunge at us. It's what happens when we're dealing with somebody on a traffic stop and they reach into their glove compartment and we think they're getting their registration and they yank out a Beretta. That's that third O. Now, our challenge is not to get stuck here. Our challenge is to, as fast as we can, turn
Exit
that
that
invisible
kill
O
zone. Yep.
back to the beginning, observe, orient, make a rational decision, and act on that decision, but then not stop. One of the best things we can do, and this I find this applies particularly to weapon retention. I can't tell you how many drills we've done, you've done them, where somebody's grabbed your gun and you're in this fight to keep your weapon, just a lethal force encounter. Are they at a disadvantage or are you at a disadvantage because they're focused on getting your gun?
I mean, that could go either way, but it could certainly play into your hand because they're not protecting their head. They're not doing the things that they would normally be doing.
If you keep thinking, exactly. For all intents and purposes, they've run through this loop. They've decided, I'm going to take that gun, and their action is take the gun, and then they never come off that action. We can try to distract them and reset them all we want. Elbow blitzes to the cheekbone work really well. But the bottom line is we have to keep thinking and not come to the decision, oh crap, they're taking my gun. I have to keep my gun, and my only action is I'm keeping my gun. Now we're both frozen in time. We're in a struggle for a gun. And we have to cycle through the OODA loops, take advantage of the fact they're locked on one thought process, and use that distraction of their own thought process to exercise our ability to protect ourselves.
That's a great point, Frank. And I have to admit that I've been stuck in that OODA cycle before when maybe I'm trying to effect some kind of takedown and it doesn't work.
And it's
he's
not
resisting,
working.
I'm trying. And what you need to do is transition from that. Maybe it's a distractive strike to the face, something that's going to take his mind off resisting that. Then you can apply the
Bottom
technique.
line, you can't reset his if you don't reset yours. This third O, the hidden and silent O, locks up everybody's brain sometimes, and we can't fall prey to it. So the observe, orient, decide, and act is what matters. That O, the third one in the middle, we can't let ourselves get locked up there, but we have to recognize our ability to use it to our advantage against the bad guys. So what I wanted to share with everybody was Boyd cycle. I mean, this guy was a fighter pilot. They called him, what, 42nd Boyd?
Yes.
He would get inside his opponent's decision-making process so fast and so easily that he would lead them into the decisions that he wanted them to make so that they'd be his prey. We don't think of the people we serve as prey, but I like thinking of the bad guys as prey. We need to get inside of their decision-making cycle and use it to our advantage, but we have to understand it from Jump Street, from get-go, and apply it and understand how it affects what we do.
You're right. It's simple, but there's a lot to it. You know, at our agency, some instructors have just said, remember to get in his OODA loop. Well, you can't just say that. That has no meaning to someone who doesn't really understand in detail what that means.
Yep.
One thing I like to tie this to also, Boyd cycle, is Cooper's colors, right? I mean, you're not going to observe or orient anything if you're in condition white, which is, you know, like this board here, meaning that
You're asleep.
You're asleep. You're totally unaware of what's going on around you. Condition yellow, that level of relaxed alertness, that's where you're going to start to pick up on these things. And then condition red, that's when maybe you make your decision, oh, he does have a weapon, I'm going to draw my gun. And of course, the act would be, you know, condition red, where you're actually firing the weapon or doing whatever is appropriate to negate that deadly threat.
You're acting on the decision you made.
Exactly.
I would debate one thing with you, and it's the kind of debate you have over a couple of beers on a weekend when you don't have anything better to do.
Where's my beer?
Everything, we're going to get there. Everything starts with the observation. If you're observing some behavior on his part that makes you think there might be a problem, that's your orientation, is you think there might be a problem. Your decision is to either continue or to take control. You continue to observe. What we need to do is get people right at the beginning where we affect their observation and how they orient themselves. We talk about command presence. If command presence isn't about this OODA loop, I don't know what is, because we come across as so professional and so strong, whether it's physically or in a personality, whatever, that they decide, based on how they've oriented themselves to their perception of us, they've observed and oriented, they've decided, this isn't the cop for me to try to fight. That was the best way to go. Or they think, maybe I can do something, and they stick their hand in their pocket. let's take control, positive control, make sure we don't put up with that. We have to stay ahead of that circle. And anybody who teaches anything to do with conflict, whether it's defensive tactics, officer survival, straight gunfighting, I don't care. If they're not teaching OODA loops, they're not doing their students a service. I believe that this is intricate to successful conflict resolution with us as coming out victorious.
Agreed. Excellent explanation, Frank, and I appreciate you educating me to that unknown
The third
O.
O.
Thanks.